Kane always believed heartbreak had a sound, and tonight it roared like the wind tearing through broken windows. Maybe that was why he didn't hear his phone hit the floor or why the world suddenly felt as sharp as shattered glass. All he knew was that Lewis's name was no longer his safe place on the screen, but the reason everything collapsed. He hadn't expected to lose him, and he definitely hadn't expected what happened after. Kane slammed the apartment door behind him, the echo ringing through the hallway like a warning. His chest tightened as he stumbled down the stairs, trying to outrun the image of Lewis walking away, the final look in his eyes, something painfully close to pity. Kane hated pity. It made him feel small, like someone watching their own life fall apart from the outside. He hit the street, breath fogging into the cold night air, and his legs moved on impulse, carrying him toward the bar on 9th, the one with sticky floors and cheap whiskey he always swore he outgrew. Maybe he had. Tonight he didn't care. Inside, the place pulsed with muffled music and the low hum of conversations he couldn't process. He went straight for the bar, slapped money down, and ordered something strong enough to burn through memory. The first swallow seared his throat, the second numbed it, and by the fourth he didn't feel much of anything at all. Which was exactly the point. Kane didn't notice someone approaching until a familiar voice cut through the haze. Rough day. Kane blinked, trying to focus. The shape in front of him sharpened into broad shoulders, a fitted dress shirt rolled at the sleeves, and a face he knew very well from 9 to 5. Lewis Grant. His boss. His straight boss. His very off-limits boss. Kane groaned under his breath. Great. Exactly what he needed. Another reminder of how his life was nothing but bad timing wrapped in worse decisions. Lewis raised a brow, studying him with that irritatingly calm expression he used in meetings when someone panicked about deadlines. You look like you lost a war. Kane let out a humorless laugh. Worse, I lost a boyfriend. Lewis's gaze softened just slightly, but it was enough to snap something in Kane. He didn't want soft, he wanted distraction, silence, anything but sympathy. So he drank more. Lewis ordered water and slid it toward him. Kane ignored it. Lewis nudged it closer. Kane ignored it again. Lewis sighed, and for the first time Kane noticed how tired he looked, like shed the weight of his own long day right before stepping into this mess. Kane, you should slow down, says the man who never breaks a rule. Kane shot back, half slurred. Let me have this. Lewis stared at him for a long moment, then quietly said, I know what it's like to break down in public. Trust me, this won't help. Kane wanted to argue, wanted to shout, maybe even laugh, but his stomach twisted in warning. The room tilted. He pushed off the bar, but his legs buckled and Lewis caught him with quick, steady hands. Hey, hold on, Lewis said, voice firm. I've got you. And Kane believed him right up until his stomach lurched, and in the worst, most cinematic betrayal of his life, the world went black around the edges, and he threw up all over Lewis's very clean, very professional shirt. Everything froze. Lewis went silent. Kane blinked, blinking again, hoping it would change the reality in front of him. Didn't. Kill me, Kane whispered hoarsely. Lewis exhaled a slow, resigned breath. Let's get you outside. The cold slapped Kane awake as Lewis, half-guided, half-dragged him toward the alley behind the bar. Kane clung to consciousness one mortifying second at a time. I can't believe I did that, Kane muttered, burying his face in his hands. It's fine, Lewis said, though his tone suggested it was anything but fine. You're drunk, upset, and apparently determined to make my night memorable. Kane groaned. Fire me. Please just fire me. Lewis let out a laugh. Actually laughed. Not happening. Come on. Sit. Kane slid down the wall until he hit the ground, legs sprawled like someone who gave up on physics. Lewis sat beside him, shirt ruined, cologne overwhelmed by the sharp scent of Kane's disaster. The silence that followed was almost strange, not heavy exactly, just there. Kane looked over at him, taking in the way Lewis stared at the sky, as if talking to the stars was easier than dealing with a drunk employee crying over his ex. Why are you being nice to me? Kane asked quietly. Lewis didn't answer for a moment. Because I know what it feels like to have everything fall apart and not want anyone to see it. Kane swallowed, trying to read him, but the world kept tilting gently like a boat rocking on waves. He whispered, I thought Lewis and I had forever, you know. Had Lewis repeated carefully. Past tense. Kane felt something sharp twist in his chest. He nodded. Lewis sighed, running a hand through his hair. Then he wasn't your forever, Kane. Kane stared at him, surprised by the simplicity of it, the truth that settled somewhere deep and sore. Before he could speak, a gust of wind hit them both and Lewis shivered. Kane blinked slow, then murmured, "You're freezing." "I'm covered in vomit," Lewis said flatly. "I think freezing is an upgrade." Kane snorted, then winced. "I'm so sorry. Really, I am." "I know," Lewis said gently. Kane leaned his head back against the wall, eyes fluttering, half closed. Through the fog, he noticed Lewis glancing at him again and again in a way he couldn't decode. Concern, maybe. Something else, maybe. He tried to sit up, but the world rolled. Lewis steadied him again, hand firm on his arm. "Don't do that," Lewis said. "You're going to pass out." "Maybe that wouldn't be so bad," Kane mumbled. "Not happening on my watch," Lewis said. "You're staying awake until I can get you home." Kane frowned. "You're taking me home. Unless you prefer the alley." Kane didn't. Definitely didn't. Lewis helped him to his feet, maneuvering him to the curb where he called a rideshare. Kane leaned against him because there was nowhere else to lean, and Lewis didn't push him away. Felt strange. Safe even. Dangerous in a different way. The car arrived and Lewis guided him and buckled him like someone bracing for impact and climbed in beside him. The city lights flashed by as Kane's consciousness flickered. "Lewis," Kane murmured. "Yeah. Why were you at that bar?" Lewis hesitated. Kane forced his eyes open, studying him. The city reflected in Lewis' expression, shadows crossing over something unspoken. "Long day," Lewis said finally. Kane didn't buy it. Not fully. But he didn't push. The car pulled up to Kane's apartment building and Lewis got him out again, supporting most of his weight up the stairs. Kane mumbled apologies the entire climb. Lewis ignored every single one. Inside the apartment, Lewis steered him to the couch. "Sit. Don't move. Try not to die." Kane nodded like a scolded kid while Lewis disappeared into the kitchen, returning with a glass of water and a trash bin. "You're surprisingly good at this," Kane said, voice trembling between exhaustion and disbelief. "I have siblings," Lewis replied. "And bad luck." He sat on the coffee table facing Kane as if waiting for him to fall apart again. Kane didn't. Not fully. But something cracked loose and he whispered, "He didn't even fight for us." Lewis met his eyes with that same steady, impossible calm. "Then he wasn't the right one." Kane stared at him. Lewis' voice had a weight to it, a conviction that sank into the pieces Kane wasn't ready to pick up. Lewis placed a hand on his shoulder, warm, grounding. "You're going to be okay." Kane wanted to believe him. Maybe he even did. The room pulled him under gently, and this time Lewis didn't stop him from slipping into sleep. When Kane woke again, sunlight cut across his face and his head throbbed like someone set off fireworks inside it. He groaned, sitting up slowly. Then he froze. A clean, folded shirt rested on the arm of the couch. Lewis' shirt. And beside it a note in neat handwriting. "You're alive, good. Drink water. I left early for a meeting. Try not to throw up on anyone today." Kane dropped his face into his hands, mortification crashing over him in waves. He threw up on his straight boss. Then the man took care of him. And left a note. This was not normal. Nothing about last night was normal. Kane stumbled to the window, rubbing his temples. Down on the street, someone was leaning against a sleek black car, arms crossed, waiting. "Lewis." Kane's heart lurched. He grabbed the shirt and pulled on something presentable before hurrying downstairs, barefoot, half awake, and entirely unprepared. Lewis looked up the moment Kane burst outside. And he smiled. A small, tired, perfectly real smile. "Morning," Lewis said. Kane stared at him, unsure whether to apologize again or run away forever. Lewis nodded toward the car. "I figured you might need a ride to work." Kane blinked. "What?" Lewis shrugged. "My shirt deserves revenge." Kane let out a choked laugh despite himself. Lewis stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Besides, we should talk about last night." A chill ran through Kane. "About the breakup?" Kane asked. "About all of it," Lewis said. "You mean what happens next?" Kane's heartbeat stuttered. What happens next, he repeated. Lewis nodded, eyes steady on him. If you're okay with it, I think we should find out. Kane swallowed hard, a rush of confusion, hope, fear, and something warm rising all at once. Lewis wasn't supposed to look at him like that. Not with that kind of softness. Not with that kind of possibility. But he did. And the world shifted. Kane whispered, "You're straight." Lewis held his gaze. "Maybe not as straight as I thought." Kane's breath hitched. And the day suddenly felt like the beginning of a story he never expected to live. Kane did not move at first. His body felt suspended between the life he thought he had and the one Lewis hinted at. The morning air carried the faint smell of coffee from a nearby shop, and for a second Kane wondered if he was still dreaming. Lewis stood there, steady, patient, and painfully sincere, as if he had all the time in the world for Kane to catch up. Finally Kane managed a breath. "You want to find out?" Lewis nodded once. Calm, certain, as if the entire situation made sense to him even though nothing about it made sense at all. Kane hesitated, searching his face for any hint of a joke or guilt or anything that would tell him he misunderstood. He found none. There was only that quiet, unwavering warmth that Lewis carried like a natural instinct. Kane opened his mouth, then closed it again. His thoughts spilled over in a rush. The breakup, the drunken disaster, the humiliation, the confusing hope in Lewis' eyes. Everything tangled together until he could barely separate one feeling from the next. Lewis stepped closer, his voice low. "You do not have to decide anything right now. Breakfast might help." Kane almost laughed. Breakfast after last night, that was what Lewis wanted to talk about. But something about the offer steadied him. Maybe because it was simple, or because Lewis managed to sound both gentle and matter-of-fact at the same time. Kane let out a slow breath. "Breakfast sounds safe." Lewis gave a small nod. "Good. I promise no judgment and no talk about shirts unless you bring it up." Kane shook his head, a smile tugging at his lips despite everything. "You are never letting that go, are you?" "Probably not," Lewis replied. They both paused then. A quiet that felt less like tension and more like possibility stretched between them. Finally Lewis motioned to the car and Kane followed him inside. The ride to the cafe was short but charged in its own subtle way. Kane kept glancing at Lewis, who focused on the road with a calm confidence that always made him look like he belonged anywhere he walked into. Kane wondered how long Lewis had been carrying whatever this was inside him. How long he ignored it. How long he hid it. When they parked and stepped out, Kane shoved his hands into his pockets, suddenly self-conscious. The cafe was small, warm, lit by soft morning light. Lewis picked a table in the corner away from the rush. Once they sat, Lewis folded his hands on the table. Kane noticed faint wrinkles at the sleeve where the ruined shirt must have been scrubbed away. A strange pang hit him. He had done that to Lewis. And Lewis still showed up. Kane cleared his throat. "So, you said we should talk." Lewis nodded. "Yes, but only what you are ready for." Kane stared at the steam rising from the coffee the server just placed in front of him. He wrapped his hands around the cup, grounding himself with the heat. The memory of Lewis' arms holding him last night flickered back. The careful way he steadied him. The patience in his voice. The note he left behind. The smile this morning. None of it lined up with the version of Lewis that Kane believed existed. The straight boss. The man who always kept his world neatly arranged. Kane spoke before he could overthink it. "Last night, I was a mess." Lewis shook his head. "You were heartbroken and drunk. Those are different things." Kane gave a weak laugh. Still not ideal for first impressions. Lewis looked at him with a gentleness that made Kane's chest tighten. "Kane, I know who you are at work. I know the passion, the humor, the way you handle stress even when you think no one notices. Last night did not erase any of that." Kane stared at him, stunned by the sincerity in every word. Lewis had always been observant, but Kane never imagined he noticed him like that. Kane swallowed. "You said you might not be as straight as you thought." Lewis breathed out slowly. "Yes." Kane waited, giving him room. Lewis met his eyes. "I have spent a long time assuming certain things about myself because they were easy or expected. But last night when I saw you like that, something in me reacted. Not just concern. Something deeper. Something I could not keep pushing aside. Felt dangerous hearing it. Powerful. Kane felt something flicker in his chest that he was afraid to name. He whispered, "Are you sure you are not confusing guilt with something else?" Lewis smiled faintly. "I know the difference between guilt and wanting to be there for someone. I stayed because I wanted to, and I am here this morning because I want to be." The words hit Kane with a warmth he did not expect, but the fear followed quickly behind. Kane leaned back in his chair. "Lewis, I just got out of a breakup. I am a mess. You do not deserve to get dragged into my chaos." Lewis rested his forearms on the table, leaning closer. "Then let me decide what I am willing to take on. You are not a burden, Kane. You are allowed to be hurting. You are allowed to be confused." Kane let that sit for a moment. The truth in it loosened something he had kept tight for too long. He let out a shaky breath. "I do not know what I feel right now." Lewis nodded. "I am not asking you to. I am only asking for honesty. And time. No pressure. No timeline." Kane stared at him. Lewis meant it. Every word. Kane could see it in the way he held his gaze steady but soft, offering space without stepping back. Kane looked down at his hands. When Lewis spoke again, his voice was low. "You deserve someone who chooses you, Kane. Not someone who gives up on you. And I am not giving up." Kane felt his throat tighten. He pushed back the sudden sting in his eyes. Lewis continued, "If all you want right now is friendship, I can do that. If you want distance, I can do that too. If someday things change, we will deal with it then. I am not here to rush you or replace anyone. I am just here." Kane took in every word, every quiet breath between them, and something inside him shifted. A small, cautious spark of trust. He whispered, "Why me?" Lewis answered without hesitation, "Because you make the world feel less heavy." Kane blinked, caught off guard. Lewis did not look away. "And because last night when you were falling apart you still apologized to me 10 times even though I kept telling you to stop. Most people do not care about others in moments like that. But you did." Kane exhaled slowly, a breath that felt like surrender in the smallest, safest way. The server dropped off food and they both paused, letting the moment settle. Kane picked up his fork but did not eat right away. Lewis waited silently, giving him room again. Finally Kane spoke. "Maybe we can figure it out slowly." Lewis gave a soft smile. "Slow sounds perfect." Kane felt something gentle unfold inside him. A beginning. Uncertain but not frightening. They ate quietly for a few minutes until Lewis spoke again, his tone lighter. "And for the record, you did not ruin my shirt that badly." Kane snorted. "Lewis, it was a crime scene." Lewis shrugged. "I have backups." Kane shook his head, laughter slipping free for the first time in days. Lewis watched him with that warm, steady expression that made Kane feel seen in a way he did not expect. When they finished, Lewis walked him back to the car. As they stood beside it, Kane hesitated. Lewis waited. Kane met his eyes. "Thank you." Lewis nodded. "Anytime." Kane took a breath. "Maybe we can talk again after work." Lewis' lips lifted slightly. "I would like that." And for the first time since the breakup, the world did not feel like it was falling apart. It felt like it was shifting into something new. Something Kane was finally willing to step toward. Work felt different that day. Not because anything had changed in the office itself, but because every time Kane walked past Lewis' door, his heart did something inconvenient. A stutter. A small jump. A reminder of the morning that still lived warm under his skin. He tried to focus. Tried to bury himself in spreadsheets and emails and the quiet chaos of deadlines. But his thoughts kept drifting back to Lewis' smile across the cafe table and the gentle weight of those words. "Slow sounds perfect." Kane inhaled deeply and pushed onward. Hour after hour, he forced himself through the day until finally the clock hit 5:30. He collected his things, hands slightly unsteady, and took a breath before heading to Lewis' office. He knocked lightly. The door opened almost immediately. Lewis looked tired but with a softness that made the exhaustion seem almost like an afterthought. He stepped aside so Kane could enter. "You made it," Lewis said. Kane nodded. "You asked me to talk." Lewis closed the door gently. "I did, and I still want to if you are up for it." Kane hesitated. Something in him still trembled with uncertainty, but something else pushed forward. A quiet pull toward honesty. He sat on the small sofa in the corner of Louis' office, and Louis joined him but left enough space between them that Kane never felt crowded. It was intentional. Kane knew that. Louis had been giving him that space all day. Kane rubbed his palms against his knees. I've been thinking. Louis waited. No rush, no pressure. Kane looked at him. Today was strange. Not in a bad way, just different. I kept trying to understand what this morning meant. What you meant. And what I am supposed to do with all of that when I can barely trust my own emotions right now. Louis nodded slowly. That is fair. And honest. Which is exactly what we need. Kane took a breath. I don't want to hurt you. Or myself. Or anyone. I don't want this to be some rebound spiral I drag you into. Louis' expression softened, but he didn't interrupt. Kane exhaled. But I also don't want to pretend nothing is happening. Because I feel something. I just don't know what it is yet. Louis leaned forward, slightly resting his elbows on his knees, but keeping his voice gentle. Then that is where we start. Not with answers. Just with the truth that something is there. Even if neither of us can name it yet. Kane looked down at his hands again. You make it sound simple. Louis smiled faintly. Nothing about this is simple. But it can be honest. And human. That is enough. Kane felt a quiet calm settle over him. It wasn't resolution. But it was something close to peace. He met Louis' eyes. So, what now? Louis considered the question. For now, maybe we keep talking. No labels, no pressure. We get to know each other in a way we never did at work. And we let things unfold at their own pace. Kane nodded slowly. I think I can do that. A small warmth spread through Louis' expression. Good. And for the record, you are doing better today than you think. Kane almost laughed. I spilled my coffee. Twice. Progress, Louis said simply. Kane shook his head, but the smile that formed felt real. They talked a bit longer about work, about the stress both of them had been carrying, about life outside the office they rarely mentioned. Kane realized how little he actually knew about Louis' day-to-day world. How many assumptions he had made simply because Louis always appeared put together. Eventually the conversation drifted back to something lighter and easier. Louis glanced at the clock. Do you want dinner? After a day like this you should eat something. Kane blinked. Dinner. With you. Louis nodded. Only if you want to. No hidden meaning, no expectations. Just food. Kane hesitated only a second. Yeah. I want to. The restaurant Louis chose was quiet, tucked between two old brick buildings. The moment they stepped inside, Kane felt some of the heaviness in his chest ease. They were seated near the window where the soft glow of the streetlights touched the table in warm gold. Kane studied the menu, mostly pretending to read while stealing glances at Louis. The man looked relaxed in a way Kane had never seen before. Not the composed professional mask he wore at work, but something more real. More approachable. It stirred something deep in Kane that he still couldn't name. They ordered and fell into conversation that flowed surprisingly easily. Kane learned that Louis liked hiking on weekends and preferred jazz to pop music. That he hated overly sweet coffee but drank it anyway when he was stressed. That had nearly gone into architecture before switching paths last minute. Kane found himself opening up too. About the small things. His childhood dog. His fear of deep water. How he once dyed his hair blue in college on a dare and regretted it immediately. Louis laughed at that, the sound low and warm. That must have looked amazing, Louis said. It looked like a blueberry disaster, Kane replied. Louis leaned back, watching him with an expression that made Kane feel seen in a way that wasn't overwhelming but deeply comforting. When their food arrived, they ate slowly, talking between bites until the tension in Kane's shoulders completely dissolved. At one point Kane caught Louis looking at him, not with intensity but with quiet admiration. Something warm flickered through him, a spark that made his breath stumble. Louis' voice softened. Can I ask you something personal? Kane nodded. Sure. When you were with him, did you ever feel like you had to make yourself smaller? Kane sat still for a moment, the question hitting with surprising accuracy. Sometimes, he admitted. But I thought that was just part of relationships. Compromise and all that. Louis shook his head slightly. Compromise should never mean shrinking yourself. Kane looked at him quietly. Lewis said it with such conviction that Kane wondered how long Head waited to say those words out loud. Maybe for himself. Maybe for someone else. Maybe for this moment. Kane breathed out. I don't want to shrink anymore. You don't have to, Lewis said. Something moved inside Kane. Something steady, warm, and frightening in its honesty. They finished dinner and stepped outside where the air had cooled and the city hummed around them. Kane hugged his jacket close and Lewis noticed immediately. You are cold, Lewis murmured. A little. Lewis hesitated, then offered his coat. Kane blinked. I can't take that. It's warm, Lewis said simply. And you need it more. Kane slipped into it, aware of the faint lingering scent of Lewis' cologne. It wrapped around him in a way that felt more intimate than anything else they had shared today. They walked toward the car in a quiet that felt neither awkward nor unfinished. Just real. Before Kane could reach for the door handle, he felt Lewis look at him. Not intensely, not expectantly, just there, present. Lewis spoke softly. Thank you for today, for not shutting down, for trying. Kane swallowed. You made it easier. Lewis smiled. That is all I wanted. Kane felt their worlds tilt again, not violently like heartbreak, but gently like the early shift of a new tide. Lewis opened the door for him and Kane slid in, but before he could close it he spoke. Lewis. Yeah. I'm glad you were there last night. Even if the whole thing was a disaster. Lewis' lips curved. I'm glad too. Though next time let's skip the part where you throw up on me. Kane laughed quietly. Deal. They drove back in companionable silence. When they reached Kane's building, Kane stepped out, still wrapped in Lewis' coat. Lewis stood by the car door, his expression unreadable but warm. Kane held his breath, unsure what came next. Lewis met his eyes. Get some sleep. We can talk again tomorrow. Kane nodded softly. Tomorrow. Lewis waited until Kane reached the door before getting back in the car. Kane watched the taillights fade down the street, feeling the weight of something new settling into his life. Not fear. Not confusion. Something like hope. He touched the collar of the coat, still holding the warmth of Lewis' skin, and whispered into the quiet hallway. Tomorrow.